World powers gathered in Munich for the 48th G7 summit. On Sunday, the G7 leaders, along with the EU representatives, held a roundtable discussion. And like most high-stakes summits, the Ukraine-Russia war continues to dominate the talks. In a new concerted action to cut off Moscow's financial lifeline, ahead of the meeting, world powers agreed to ban gold imports from Russia. The Western partners gathered at the Almau Castle in the Bavarian Alps before they continue on to Madrid for talks with NATO partners. The G7 will seek to close ranks in their backing for Ukraine amid the war. While grappling with intensifying global fallout of the war, from the soaring inflation to a looming food crisis and energy shortages, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, now in its fifth month, has mired the world in a series of crises. US President Joe Biden, who is on a 5-day trip to Europe, held a bilateral meeting with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The two leaders vowed to stay united against Russian invasion of Ukraine.
We have to stay together, because Putin has been counting on from the beginning. And somehow NATO would and the G7 would splinter, but we haven't, and we're not going to. So can't let this aggression take the form it has and get away with it.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and French President Emmanuel Macron also held a bilateral meet ahead of the summit. Both leaders say they saw an opportunity to turn the tide in Ukraine. Johnson also warned against trying to settle the conflict. Other leaders, including Italian President Mario Draghi, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen also arrived in Munich. The leaders will also be confronted with the looming threat of recession, as well as pressures over climate change. A special but regular guest at the G7 summit is India. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also in Munich for the crucial summit. This is Prime Minister Modi's second trip to Germany in 2 months. In May, he visited the country for the 6th edition of the India-Germany Intergovernmental Consultations. He is expected to hold bilateral meetings with other G7 leaders. India isn't a member of the grouping, but its regular participation clearly reflects that the West needs its support to confront major global challenges. So this year, too, Germany invited its close South Asian ally. Washington says that New Delhi's presence at the table is crucial. New Delhi's participation at the G7 comes despite a differing stance on the war. While the US and Europe have chosen to go the sanctions way, New Delhi has maintained that diplomacy and dialogue is the way forward to solve the conflict. So will New Delhi's cameo in Germany affect its relations with Moscow? Well, G7 leaders say the aim is not to splinter the two allies. And for more on this, our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibbal, is joining us live from Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and this is situated in Germany's Bavaria state. Hello to you, Siddhant. Now, you are at the heart of the action. What is expected on day 2 of the G7 summit?
Well, Alison, it will be yet another long day, and the G7 leaders trying to send a message to Moscow in terms of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But the day starts with an important speech by President Zelensky. The Ukrainian president will virtually join the G7 leaders and address, and we all know he will be in detail talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In fact, on the first day when the G7 leaders started their meetings, there was an attack in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, and we saw the visuals. So clearly there was a message being sent by Moscow as well, but we will have to wait for the joint statement that will be released tomorrow, because that joint statement will be interesting in terms of what the G7 groupings has decided in terms of dealing with President Putin. There are, of course, a strong buzz of sanctions being announced by the G7 grouping. That remains a top focus. But also, as the German Chancellor has said, that a new Marshall Plan, or a new reconstruction plan for Ukraine could also be on the anvil. But nonetheless, today is also a day of outreach with the 5 invitee guests, which include India, Indonesia, Senegal, South Africa and Argentina. So this is essentially the G7 reaching out to powerful countries in global south, and together they are keen that a message is sent across to Moscow, but also global issues like climate change and the price rise in commodity can be dealt with.
Absolutely, Siddhant. Also, can you share the details of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's engagements on the sidelines of the G7 summit?
Well, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be participating at the G7 Outreach Summit. He has, in fact, he will be addressing two sessions. The first session will be on climate, health, and the second session will be on gender inequality, the problems faced in that sector, which will, of course, see the participation of the UNSG as well. But he has five bilaterals, key bilaterals with the Prime Minister of Canada, with the President of Indonesia, with the President of South Africa, with the leadership of European Union, and a bilateral with the German Chancellor. Now, one of the most interesting bilaterals of these five bilaterals is his meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister. That is important given that the relationship wasn't very positive in terms of the comments made by the Canadian Prime Minister in 2020, and those comments were the comments when it comes to the farmer protest happening in India. So that led to India summoning the then envoy Nadir Patel as well. So this meeting comes almost 2 years after that. That shows that there is a concerted effort by Ottawa and New Delhi to improve the relationship with Indonesia. Remember that Indonesia is the chair of the G20 this year. India will be the chair of G20 next year, hosting the summit in New Delhi and also having 190 meetings. So both sides will be keen that the engagement continues between the two countries. And with South Africa, it is important to remember that both countries increased their engagement during the COVID crisis and had jointly given the proposal to give a waiver when it comes to COVID vaccine manufacturing at the WTO, and this is something that showed that how these two countries have been engaging in the past.
Siddhant, thank you very much for bringing us all the latest details on that ongoing G7 summit.
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.